What's up, everybody? Welcome into Group Chat Football Live. I am Peter Ariz alongside D Money, and this is our show where we go live daily talking transfer portal news across the country, recruiting news across college football, and everything else in between in terms of the transactions. Because, man, it's like the NFL now. It's always moving. The rosters are constantly changing. There's coach movement still going on here, as we still have the playoffs to be finished up. But a lot of stuff has happened in the last few days as we've been gone in the new year. D, welcome in. How you doing?
Doing good, man. A lot of moves, a lot of former 5-stars on the move. You see Dion making moves, Belichick making moves, Kirby Smart making moves. A lot of action, a lot of interesting things to unpack, examining some potential fits here.
And we'll start with a pair of brothers that we've spoken about a few times here over the last week plus, and that is the Branch brothers, Zion and Zachariah Branch, formerly played at USC, and they're Georgia bound. These guys were on campus at Miami recently. It looks like Miami had made a late push there, but Georgia, who early on had kind of been named as the favorites to watch here, ends up grabbing them. Zion, the safety, who has dealt with some injuries over the course of his career, but physically gifted. And again, he's a veteran guy, has played football for a few years, just has not completely stayed healthy. And then Zachariah, the electric receiver, return man, was burst onto the scene as a true freshman at USC a couple years ago. Numbers weren't the same this year, was banged up, but gets a fresh start here in the SEC.
Yeah, it's amazing a school that recruits as well as Georgia is in this position when it comes to wide receiver. I mean, everybody saw in the game against Notre Dame one of the worst drops we've seen, and that was the whole season, right? Georgia leading the country in drops. A guy like Zachariah Branch, an elite athlete. You lose Arian Smith, who's very much, he's not your pure receiver. He's a guy that gets by on his speed, his electricity. He's your leading receiver. You got to replace him and what he brings. Zachariah Branch, 5'10", 175, 10.33 in the 100 meters, 21.01 in the 200 meters, 24 long jump, 46, 4.25 triple jump. I mean, just unique explosiveness. Now, is the Zachariah Branch we saw as a freshman going to go to Georgia, or the Zachariah Branch we saw this past season? He did improve his receiving stats last season, but he was not the same dynamic player. Went from the absolute best punt returner in the country, leading the country in punt return average, first team All-America as a freshman, to really middle of the pack as a sophomore. Again, his receiving stats went up, but you didn't see the explosiveness as a receiver. 47 receptions, 503 yards, and a touchdown, not making the big plays that he is capable of. So can Georgia get more out of this dynamic athlete? This is a guy who's related to the legendary Cliff Branch. Genetics are off the charts. Again, we went over the track times. A lot of Tyreek Hill comparisons out of high school and as their freshman year. So what are we going to see at Georgia? I think the opportunity there is golden. Certainly the need is huge. You see Georgia also trying to make a move for Noah Thomas out of Texas A&M, a totally different type of wide receiver who was on campus this past weekend. But in terms of replacing that electricity that you got with Arian Smith, certainly Zachariah Branch is a big part of that. Zion Branch, hopefully in your system, you can get more out of this guy, keep him healthy. He can tackle. He does have some physical tools, but certainly, in terms of what's driving the Georgia interest here, you got to think it's Zachariah and what he can bring to an offense that sorely needs some explosiveness.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see, as you alluded to, kind of how they use him in this offense, right? Quarterback situation, we'll see what ends up playing out there. It looks like they have their guy for next season, but at USC, I think at times, obviously, again, he dealt with some injuries last year, but his role, you didn't necessarily see him used probably as much as he would have liked to be used. More of a gadget player at USC, and he probably thinks he's more than that.
Yeah, and USC had a lot of receivers, and another issue with USC is they had one of the worst offensive lines in the country. So as far as the time from the ball getting snapped to the ball getting out, it was very abbreviated because the quarterbacks, whether it was Miller Moss, whether it was Mayava, they needed to get the ball out early because they could not hold on to the ball and chuck it downfield with the pass protection being what it was. Lincoln Riley adjusted his scheme to compensate for that offensive line. And I think that limited some of Zachariah Branch's ability to get downfield and make big plays. Again, 47 receptions. It's not like he was totally on the sideline,
Right.
but the truly meaningful catches were not there for Zachariah Branch. And then the punt return, that's got to improve. I mean, we know he can do it because he's done it before. That's a way for him to make a significant impact. This is a first-team All-America player as a freshman at that position. So you want to see that improve. And he's had some nicks, but you expect him to get healthy. I think this makes sense for Georgia, but I'm not sure if this solves all of their receiving problems with one player. I think he solves a segment of what they need, but, I don't think this takes them out of the Noah Thomas sweepstakes. I think the need for that kind of player who can make contested catches, especially with Kobe Young's status, unclear due to legal issues, I think the need for a Noah Thomas is just as strong now as it was before this Branch signing.
Without a doubt. Yeah, we saw, Miami was in the Branch sweepstakes. We've heard that there was interest in Thomas as well. So they wouldn't be the only program who had aspirations of kind of pairing those two together.
Yeah, look, Miami really went after the Branch brothers on their visit. Obviously there's a big NIL situation with the Branch brothers. Who's going to meet that number? You look at the fact that they're also Jordan brand players. Uniquely, they had deals as high schoolers that they carry on to college. So Adidas schools, that was a challenge for those schools recruiting these players. But yeah, I think ultimately it came down to Georgia prioritized Zachariah, Zion kind of along for the ride, and they needed receivers. And obviously they provided what the Branch brothers needed. And I think there is a fit, but if I'm Georgia, I don't just say, hey, pens down, we got our guy, a receiver. I would go just as hard after a Noah Thomas as I was before. And if some other receivers emerge in the portal, I think it makes sense to go after those guys. They need more. This school's recruited better than any school in the country over the past 3 years. They need more at the skill positions to truly measure up to, look, and they won the SEC, so I don't want to downgrade it too much, but there's certainly a standard at Georgia that's not being met, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. The drop-off from last year to this year, profound. Stetson Bennett, those were not offensive-driven teams, but they had enough to make plays. They need to get back to that level. Actually, probably need to get back above that level because it's hard to replicate the unique stockpiling of defensive talent that they had on those Stetson Bennett teams. Those were multiple first-rounders all over the place. And
a reliance on a Brock Bowers who is doing things we've never seen before as a rookie in the NFL.
Right. And you had Ladd McConkey earlier in his career. Certainly last year he had him fully bloomed. So to me, Georgia needs, defense can get you a long way. The best teams in college football this year were defensive oriented teams. The Final Four, all four of them are four of the top defenses in the country. And Georgia was right there on the door, plus having won the SEC really on the strength of their defense. So, it's not like you need to be the number one offense in the country. Miami was the number one offense in the country this year. They're on the outside looking in, but you need more than what you're getting. And I think Branch helps you at least in the explosiveness component. Right. We'll see what else they do to get this offense where it needs to be.
So we are going to stay here in California, just talking about the Branch brothers from USC there, as Jaron Sagapolutele is headed to Cal. And we talked about this situation last week. This was a top 10 national quarterback recruit in this recruiting cycle who had just signed with Oregon a few weeks back, was previously committed to Cal, and then flipped to Oregon. So this isn't an AI photo here. We didn't have to use that technology, even though it's at Cal. I know they have all that stuff out there. But he was committed there, right? So he had a lot of familiarity with the program. Oregon, Achilles Smith Jr. in the class over there. And I think it was a pretty obvious decision in terms of a clear path. With Fernando Mendoza gone, you have a new offensive staff, some new coaches over there. Nick Rolovich, formerly at Washington State, as the head coach, coming in as an offensive assistant. Really good track record from him. So this is an interesting situation from a very, very talented thrower of the football from Hawaii.
Yeah, I love this move for all parties involved, especially Cal. This was a cool season for Cal. I was there for the Miami game, College Game Day. It was an awesome atmosphere, really, really just unique vibe out there. The fan base, the Calgorithm had so much fun. And so much of that was driven by Fernando Mendoza, who was one of the better young quarterbacks in the country. Of course, he moves on. He takes the Mendoza burrito, which they were serving in California, with him. Maybe they'll do a new burrito here with a Hawaiian flavor, maybe some poke for Sagapolutele. But man, this team needed to move on quickly from to an elite high school quarterback, the number 8 quarterback in the nation in a class, excuse me, that I feel is one of the best high school classes of quarterbacks that I have ever seen, at least coming out. So for this guy to be a number 8 quarterback in the country in this class is outstanding. From Ua Beach, Hawaii, 6'2", 217. He's almost like Tua on steroids, right? Left-handed quarterback from Hawaii. But this guy's got more size than Tua, more arm strength, and he is the number 1 leading passer in the history of the state of Hawaii, beating Dylan Gabriel's record. So again, Tua on steroids. Not saying he's going to have that kind of career, but just in certain respects, you see that. There's been rumors of why he went from Cal to Oregon in the first place. That was a bit of a shocker there on signing day. He gets to Oregon. He's actually practicing with the team, or he's with the team. You got Akili Smith Jr., son of an Oregon legend, already in your same class. Dante Moore, the 5-star who transferred from UCLA to Oregon, looks like he's the heir apparent at quarterback. Looks like he just said, listen, this is not a clear situation for me to play. Cal, with Mendoza moving on, is wide open. I can go there and start in the ACC day one, kind of take my lumps, earn my stripes early, speed up the development process. This is a guy with one of the strongest arms in America, finished in the top 11 for the Elite 11 camp. And Pete, I know you talk to scouts from your time as an agent. You keep in touch with a lot of guys. Nick Rolovich is someone with an impeccable reputation as a quarterback developer.
Yeah, I mean, look, he had the situation at Washington State, which he, during COVID, which I believe he refused to take the vaccine, and pretty much had to step away, was fired because of that. And I think this is a situation where his influence could play big dividends. We're still seeing years later the quarterbacks coming out of Washington State. A lot of the coaches there were connected to Rolovich, and his staff. So I think this is a great fit for him. You see the arm. You see some of these throws off of one leg there, kind of floating backward, just flicking it. So Cal, look. It's a different situation. You're losing a lot. Mendoza's not there, obviously, but you're losing some talent around that. The offensive line was not very good last year, but it's a real clean slate, like you said, for him to be able to come in here, potentially win this job. And experience is such a big thing, as we've seen, D, for these quarterbacks, especially early in their career, I think they could set up a nice situation for him. And win some games early out there. He's got the talent to do it.
100%. And look, you got to get this guy some help, right? You look at Cal last year. Cal did not have the most dynamic receiving core last year, but you lose a Mikey Matthews to UCLA, right? You lose an Isaiah Hunter to Nebraska. I don't see anybody coming in right now that is going to replace those guys. So that's where you get to work. You got the 5-star quarterback. He is your future. He could be the face of the program. He could be what Aaron Rodgers was for you as far as elevating your program to a level they weren't at. So you need to help this young man, get him some receivers, improve that offensive line, which is one of the reasons probably why Mendoza stepped out, and build around him. I know, look, Wilcox is a defensive coach. Cal was a defensive team this year, aside from Mendoza and what he brought. You do get back Jaden Ott, which is huge, especially if he gets healthier and gets back to his 2023 form. But get this guy some help at the offensive line and the receiver position, because you're a whole team. It's almost like Dylan Raiola in Nebraska. This is your program right now for the foreseeable future. Make sure you can build around him so you have him for 3 years, then he goes to the pros. That's a perfect scenario for Cal. And you have a chance to do it now because you have the most important part in the fold.
Appreciate everyone on with us right now. I have almost 30 live viewers. Remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Chuck Henninger says, great show. Go Canes. Appreciate the support, my man. We'll be on Canes Insight live after this show. But man, a lot of stuff to get to, D. There a lot of stuff happened over the last few days. And again, the portal now with classes coming back here in the next week, 2 weeks. You got to enroll now. Workouts are going to be starting up, so guys don't want to get behind the 8 ball.
No, that's why you see so much movement here. Plus, the portal's closed, aside from just a couple of teams. So the guys that are in the portal are the players, and you got to recruit those guys. And I'm sure they're tired of visiting and recruiting and everything else. So you're starting to see this thing speed up and speed to resolution, and the competition for the remaining players getting hotter and hotter.
One school that's been aggressive in the portal, and no surprise about that, is Auburn. As Hugh Freeze, those seats getting a bit warm over there, as there normally isn't much patience in Auburn, a program that has very high expectations year in, year out. But this is a good pickup here on the defensive line as edge rusher Chris Murray from Sam Houston State transfers over. And this was a guy who was first team all conference last year, 11.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, 6'4", 255. Really good motor, though, and was a high 3-star recruit coming out, signed with TCU, transferred to Sam Houston State after that first year. But that production, man, you can't deny production. We'll see what it looks like against SEC tackles, but obviously coming out as a high recruit, the athletic ability should be there.
Yeah, and that's a funny thing you see when you look at these transfers to big programs. Sometimes you'll say, wow, this is a small school kid going to the SEC or the Big Ten or whatever it is. And you dig deep into the background and you say, well, this guy was originally recruited at that level. He just kind of had a roundabout way to getting to the same place. But the body type, the athleticism was always considered at that level. He just needed some seasoning, some experience. And that's what he got at these smaller schools. So you look at Murray, like you said, 6'4", 255. First team all conference. All that is good. Pro Football Focus loves him, 78.1 grade, 38 pressures, 24 quarterback hurries. And just watching him a little bit, playing down. So he's not a stand-up edge rusher necessarily. He can play down. Really long arms, good hands, can get off guys. You look at Auburn's situation on the edge. You lose Jalen McLeod's an 8 sacks player going out the door. Keldrick Falk comes back, 7 sacks. You also bring in Jared Smith, who I watched in the Under Armour game and is a physical monster, but could probably use some polishing. The 5-star player, one of the top edges in the country, basketball background. I mean, just totally looks the part, but not someone that you say is a finished product as far as their hands, their craft. They're just kind of getting by on skill and athleticism, on talent. Work on his craft, sharpen the tools, and a guy like Murray comes in, replaces what McLeod gives you to an extent, and lets this thing keep rolling. Auburn's defense last year was not bad at all. They've recruited at an extremely high level the past 2 years, brought in a lot of front seven talent, a lot of front seven athletes with size. So we know what they did on the offensive end, at the quarterback position, at the wide receiver position, at the tackle position. This is a team that's gearing up for a run, 4 straight losing seasons. They're tired of it. Preseason top 10, according to some way too early polls. We'll talk about that here later on group chat. But this was a move that I think makes sense to bridge between what you have leaving and what you have coming in with Jared Smith.
Well, and we've seen a lot of guys been brought in on the offensive side of the ball. Eric Singleton highlighting that at the receiver spot, but the quarterback spot, they've loaded that room up to where you have a little bit of everything there now. Jackson Arnold coming over from Oklahoma, but you'd have to think right up there, this was a huge priority for them, is continuing to get some pass rush off the edge.
Yeah, and if you get a guy from a smaller school, again, we mentioned he was really a big school recruit that ended up at a smaller school, but when you're bringing him in from that level, you don't just want to have him play okay there. You want him to be a pretty dominant player. So this is a first-team all-conference player. Now, it's Conference USA. It's not the SEC, but you can't get higher than first team, right, inside the conference. So he's doing what he needs to do there. Watched him against UCF, which is a quality team, and he looked, it's quality talent, I should say. They weren't that great of a team this year, but he did not look out of place at all, had a forced fumble, looked the part. So I don't think, going to the SEC, he's going to look out of place. He's not going to be dominant necessarily, but he should be solid there just from a physical eye test standpoint, based on what I've seen from him, what the production says, and what the Pro Football Focus grade is. So, good pickup. Edges are going to be always a hot commodity here in the portal. You see some guys get opportunities in the SEC that have not necessarily produced. We'll talk about those guys in a second. Then you get some of these smaller school guys that have produced. They get to step up a level. So he's in that category, and I think it's a good pickup.
staying in the SEC, a name that has been in a few places now, but very, very solid and productive player. Jalen Catalon, safety, is headed back to the SEC. So this is a guy who started his career at Arkansas, went to Texas, UNLV, and is now heading to Missouri to play for Coach Eli Drinkwitz and his staff over there. And it's an interesting story with this one, D. This is a guy, Jalen Catalon. I remember a few years back when I was doing a lot of recruiting as an NFL agent, his name was heavily in the mix as a top 100 type talent and potential pick. Had an injury at Arkansas, ends up transferring to Texas. I think the injuries kind of caught up to him, but had a really, really good bounce back year, showed he was healthy at UNLV, and he lands back in the SEC. And I'm kind of honestly surprised we didn't hear his name more in the portal because of his past experience. But again, I'm rooting for this guy as someone who I know was a big-time, legit NFL prospect. The injuries got in his way, as we've mentioned, but can really finish his college career off solid here back at Missouri.
Yeah, you look at the timeline: Arkansas, Texas, UNLV, and then, of course, now Missouri. 4-star player out of Mansfield, Texas. This is amazing to me. You look at the class of 2019, pre-pandemic, where Catalon was in. Look at some of the safeties in this class: Kyle Hamilton, Daxton Hill, Lewis Seen, Nick Cross, Jordan Battle. These are all guys you see on Sundays. So older player, but sometimes we see these guys that bounce around a little bit. There's character concerns, things like that. This guy's an honor roll kid. And, you know, the fact that he's been around so long at a position like safety, which is so much about IQ, so much about knowing where to line up, knowing how to line people up, just knowing what you're seeing. That experience is invaluable, especially when you combine it with somebody who has NFL talent in his body. He was an NFL prospect back in 2020, right, when he was first team All-SEC as a young player. The shoulder injuries are scary because when you watch this guy play, he is the definition of a downhill thumper. He flies downfield. He makes tackles that are borderline reckless, probably why he had some shoulder injuries in the first place. But the physicality didn't leave him at UNLV. His stats last year were outstanding. You look at some of the numbers here at UNLV. I'm talking about 96 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 5 INTs, 4 pass deflections, first team All-Mountain West. The PFF grades are off the charts, 78.7 in coverage and 73.5 in run defense, even with the bump shoulder. So he is still very much a productive player. And the body has always been SEC caliber. That's where he signed out of high school. That's where he was first team in the conference. So you combine the SEC traits with the IQ of someone who's been around the block. I think this could end up being a home run for Missouri, assuming he can stay healthy. This is a defense that, you know, really needs some leadership and someone to be a tone setter. And I think that's what Catalon is. He is a tone setting defensive player just by the way he plays the game and his experience.
Arkansas fans aren't too happy, man. They two teams they don't like at all, Missouri and Texas. And we're getting a comment here from Matthew Owen saying, I hate that players can transfer as many times as they want. Look, I would think in the next year or so, there's going to be some sort of legislation where there's going to be a limit somewhat. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, no, I agree. This is a situation where it's very much ad hoc. You have lawyers drafting settlements that should be collectively bargained, right, in a normal situation by employees and employer. That's normally how you kind of set the rules. These are being done in the settlement of an antitrust suit, so that's a little unusual. That's why you see things so ad hoc. I think if you ultimately get it where it's more professionalized, look, I'm not saying, look, this is just what it is in 2024, 2025 now. Then you can kind of set these rules the same way the NFL sets rules, the same way that the NBA and Major League Baseball set rules. Right now, it's being done ad hoc because it's really being done through lawsuits under, you know, antitrust law. And then the rules of the NCAA kind of get stricken here, stricken there, as opposed to, hey, let's come together and make some rules.
Yeah, it's a good point from Kane's Cat C305, who says the reason you fell in love with college football is not the way it currently is. Yeah, I mean, look, you don't know if your favorite players are going to be there for 2-3 years 4 years. So it's you don't want to become emotionally attached anymore, right?
But look, I mean, it was not fair to the players before.
I'm
so
not saying it was.
yeah.
I'm giving a little credence to his.
And I think there's some things about college football that are better now. There's some things that are not as fun. Certainly, if you're in the coaching community, this is not fun. I think you just have to get together and make some rules together. The problem is, again, it's not an NFL or MLB situation where you say, here's the players union, here's the owners, let's negotiate. It's a little different than that. So that's what's making it hard to get together and say, these are the rules, because anytime they make rules, they're going to get challenged in the court of law. And the courts have been pretty clear. The NCAA is in the wrong. They've lost every time they've gone to court. So, the players, the NCAA does not want to recognize the players as employees, but that's what's preventing this process. Now, one option is they go to Congress and get a safe harbor from antitrust law so they don't get sued every 2 seconds. And we'll see if that happens. That's been a tricky thing to get across in the recent years. Let's see if the political climate is more favorable now for them to do that. But if they do that, that's not necessarily fair to the players, because the players have been the ones winning in court every single time. And then you kind of get around that by giving NCAA a safe harbor to not abide by antitrust law. So where this ends up, in my best guess, is that ultimately the players will be in some sort of union and they can negotiate directly with these schools to create a set of rules that everybody follows and agrees to. And I'm sure number one on that list is going to be stopping these 1-year contracts that you don't even have in the pros, where every year you're renegotiating. That's just not how it is in any sport except for college football, which makes it a little tricky.
Yeah, and look, and you mentioned the coaches, how tough it is for them too. The thing is, in the pros, the coaches aren't tasked with recruiting. They're not tasked with scouting, which is essentially half of the recruiting job, right? So they're not asked with bringing the players to the table and doing a lot of the stuff that management otherwise would have to deal with. So it's crazy.
But look, for a guy like Catalon, a great opportunity. You were in the SEC. Injuries kind of push you out of the SEC. You go to UNLV, you rehabilitate your stock, and now you're back where you started with a chance to be just where you were in 2020, first team all SEC on the way to the pros. So you hope for Catalon's sake that even though there's so many dashes there in his school history, that it ends pretty close to where it started and gets him off to the NFL.
Yeah, and last thing on this is, like, everyone has different reasons for transferring a bunch of times. Obviously, he had the injury stuff at Arkansas. We don't know how it ended there. He ends up going to Texas. The injury stuff obviously still lingered. He had to keep playing and at a high level. He had to go prove himself again at UNLV, and now he has an opportunity. So, and again, by all accounts, has done everything the right way in terms of, character and how he's handled himself and all that. So, should be interesting to watch him this year back in the SEC. But moving along here, as USC, they've lost a good amount in the backfield this offseason, but they've added a few, and a big one popped for them recently here in the last 24 hours as the number one junior college running back in the country, Waymond Jordan, commits to the Trojans. Originally from Pensacola, Florida, same high school as Trent Richardson, former Alabama back. And this is a guy who was not a heralded recruit coming out of high school in Pensacola, but has worked himself into the number 18 overall JUCO player in the country, number one JUCO running back. I'm going to play his highlights here in a second. Really, really interesting back here with some good feet. And he committed to USC over UCF, who new coach Scott Frost. He's from Florida. And UNC, Bill Belichick, he actually visited there. So this is a good recruiting win for the Trojans.
Yeah, absolutely. A big win. And it's amazing. You go from Pensacola, Florida, which was on the Florida Panhandle, then the Hutchinson Junior College in the Great Plains, and now out to the West Coast. So he's been on a steady journey west. USC had some really good backs last year. We talk about their receivers and maybe their offensive line deficiencies and the quarterback carousel, but really they had some good backs and they were pretty explosive, over 5 yards per carry as a team. Woody Marks goes on to the NFL. Quinton Joyner, really explosive player. I'm surprised they weren't able to hold on to him, but he goes to Texas Tech back home. So it's a big gap here in the backfield. You add a guy like Waymond Jordan, as we watch what he does on the field, this is a patient back. This is somebody with really, really good feet. the size and speed is kind of hard to tell at the JUCO level. You really got to be there in person to size him up. But if he is 5'11", 205, that's more than enough for his running style. And again, you see him kind of gliding the patience. Shoulders are always square to the end zone. He doesn't waste a lot of motion, you notice, but when there is traffic, he can make some tight moves in space. So, look at that, breaks the tackle here, but again, right upfield. So I think it's a fit. We just have to see how this, with all these JUCO kids, how does the size and speed look once he's there on the practice field down there in Los Angeles and sized up against Big Ten players. That's what you need to see. You look at the room. Again, you lose Woody Marks, you lose Quinn Joyner. You add Eli Sanders from New Mexico, a guy that was very productive at a lower level, over 1,000 yards, 7.2 yards per rush. He's going to be expected to play a major role. Also, you did have Brian Jackson in the bowl, 66 yards, touchdown, 16 carries. So you have a homegrown option, a local kid to compete with. So we'll see who comes out of that mix. USC's been using multiple backs forever, right? They were one of the first to really have a true two running back scheme with Bush and Lendale White, right? Before that, it was always like, hey, this is our running back. We got a backup running back. I mean, they were really had one of the schools that pioneered that two top back formula, which now is so commonplace. You take it for granted. So we'll see another rotation here, but just watching the film, I love the efficiency of movement that Jordan brings.
And D, now that we're on the topic of him being a junior college guy, I think we're about to see kind of a resurgence of the junior college prospect. I think the last few years it hasn't been used as much for some of these top programs, but with the recent Diego Pavia ruling, right, where they can basically go there for a year or two and not lose any of their 4 years of eligibility, then I don't see why this isn't a great option for some guys who, maybe aren't ready physically and still have some maturation to do. Maybe they're newer to football and need to really learn their position and craft a little bit better. Maybe it's an academic reasons, like it used, like the old days. Really, that was the main reason. But I think JUCOs are in a solid position here to kind of have a bit of a resurgence.
Yeah, the extra year eligibility is huge, or the extra years potentially of eligibility is huge. Hutchinson, where Waymond Jordan's from, this is a big-time JUCO. They produce guys every year. A ton of NFL guys have come out of this program. So it's not like this guy's coming from nowhere. This is a proven junior college producer of talent. Every school in the country keeps an eye on Hutchinson. Their coaches know what it means to get guys ready to play at the college level. So this is not a totally off-the-grid player. This is just a late-blooming guy. Maybe the grades weren't there. Who knows what his situation was for going to JUCO in the first place. But, yes, you see him dominating junior college competition. It's not what you're going to see in the Big Ten, but he's not forging a path that hasn't been done before as far as Hutchinson. Right. There's been a lot of big-time players to come out of this school, and he could be the next one.
Yeah, without a doubt. Some good highlights there, man. I'm impressed by him. Like we said in the beginning, really, really good feet. Ran for over 1,600 yards this year. So good get for Lincoln Riley and USC there. So we'll keep it moving here, and we'll go back to the SEC and Oklahoma. A couple big pickups for them defensively. Brent Venables, we understand it's been a bit of a rocky start there his first few years at Oklahoma, and things really need to get back on track this season. And they're going to start with the defensive side of the ball here. As Marvin Jones Jr., we'll talk about him first, comes over from Florida State. Started his career at Georgia, former 5-star recruit. And this is someone who, bit of a slow start, I would say, at Florida State this season, picked it up near the middle part half of the season, had 4 sacks for the Noles. Obviously, we've talked about FSU's problems defensively. The defensive line didn't live up to the expectations. But another fresh start here for him at Oklahoma, as he's going to be teaming up with a fellow Broward, Fort Lauderdale guy on the defensive line. There are Mason Thomas at Oklahoma. And historically, Oklahoma a few years back had Nick Benito from St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale. So they've had some success here with those Broward County products. And Marvin Jones Jr. trying to be the next in line there.
Yeah, you don't think of Oklahoma as necessarily a South Florida recruiter, right? But look, Torrance Marshall, when they won the national championship, was a big-time linebacker for him out of Miami Sunset. So there's precedence. And you mentioned Bonito and R. Mason Thomas. It's funny, you go back to that year in South Florida, it was like a bumper crop of pass rushers. The 5-star Marvin Jones, you had a 5-star Shamar Stewart, who went to Texas A&M, now projected first rounder. You had a high 4-star Kenyatta Jackson, who went to Ohio State, played a little bit here in the playoff in the rotation. So there were a lot of guys, but ultimately Mason Thomas probably ended up being the best pass rusher out of all of them, at least to this point, despite being the lowest rated on paper. Really athletic, explosive guy, plays with a high motor. Now, Jones has not to this point showed that relentless killer motor that you had with R. Mason Thomas, but on talent, there's a reason why he was a 5-star. Obviously, his dad was a great player. This for FSU, the size, the athleticism. I mean, I was blown away watching this guy in high school, just his movement patterns for being such a bigger player. At FSU, 25 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. It never really came together for him. There were a lot of problems at FSU. Patrick Payton, who went to LSU from FSU in the portal, he also underperformed. The defensive tackles underperformed. The whole defensive line underperformed. It was not just Marvin Jones. And of course, at Georgia, he was behind a lot of really good players that you're going to see drafted here in the NFL draft coming up in a few months. So could Oklahoma be the spot that unlocks more with him? It's in his body. He definitely has the traits. And maybe playing with a guy like R. Mason Thomas, who is so relentless in his pass rush with his motor. Marvin Jones says, man, I'm better than this guy. I've always been higher rated than this guy. And he's the one that's the star. And I'm kind of, the person with something to prove. Let me show him what I got. I could see this being a very, very good situation for Marvin Jones. And if he is able to fill his potential, a great situation for Oklahoma, because this is a 5-star talent when you talk about size and athletic ability.
So that was a big pickup for them in terms of a pass rusher, but they got someone on the back end of the defense in Kendall Daniels, who this is, I'm sure when Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, do they play? Are they playing anymore? Is Bedlam still? Let me check on that right now. But that's going to be a pretty contentious situation there between Oklahoma State fans. Kendall Daniels, one of the most productive players over the past few seasons in the country, and he's labeled as a defensive back, but you could see some linebacker to his game with the physicality and versatility that he brings to the position.
Yeah, former top 100 recruit. I mean, superstar freshman in 2022. Big 12 freshman of the year, 71 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 3 INTs, 8 pass breakups. That was as a safety, a big safety. He has since transitioned into a linebacker, really mostly last season with that transition, 6'4", 235. Look at his career numbers, 240 tackles, 24 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, 13 pass breakups, 5 INTs. Last year as a full-time linebacker, I watched a couple of games of his, just studying him when he entered the portal. There was an adjustment there, but you could see it starting to click. 64 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks last year as a linebacker. And, I think with that transition, we've seen it with players. The first year, it's rough. The second year, it starts to come together. A lot of times you see that happen in the pro level. 2 guys that jump to mind, James Williams, Ray Armstrong. Ray Armstrong played about 8 years in the pros, former highly touted safety about this size. James Williams, former 5-star, who was comped a lot to Isaiah Simmons out of high school. He makes a transition to linebacker his rookie year with the Tennessee Titans, ends up starting at the end of the year, but it was a transition. Daniels already made that transition, already has a season at linebacker. So you're getting him with some experience and in a position to potentially blow up at that spot. You think of Brett Venables. Who's one of Brett Venables' most famous proteges, maybe his most famous protege as far as being that queen on the chessboard on the defensive end? Isaiah Simmons, right? Who do you think of when you watch Kendall Daniels as that big safety / linebacker? Isaiah Simmons. So I think that had a lot to do with why Kendall Daniels ultimately chose Oklahoma. Obviously, it's an area he's familiar with and where he's from. But I think that particular part of it, the Simmons factor and how he was used in this scheme, is very big. And if you're an Oklahoma fan, if you have your own Isaiah Simmons, that's going to make your defense look totally different. I think, look, these are 2 former highly rated players, but with Daniels, that this guy can produce. Now, one thing I'll say, Pete, is Oklahoma State fans were not very happy with Daniels' effort towards the end of the year. Now that happens a lot when you have these disappointing seasons, particularly on defense, and you have a highly rated defender who maybe's not playing, full speed on a snap. They tend to get a lot of venom, right? Because you're frustrated with the defense and you're frustrated with this high name player not going 100%. Watching the film, I thought he played with a pretty good temperament. I didn't have too many concerns watching, a few of his games from last season, but I could see with the clips that people post on social media why he upset Oklahoma State fans at the end. But again, that was a team that was really struggling on defense in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and Bedlam is dead. R.I.P. to Bedlam. It was the last game was 2023. I remembered that as soon as I started saying it, but it's hard not to associate them when you have a guy transferring from one of these schools to another.
And by the way, Beggs, Oklahoma, where Daniels is originally from, so hometown here for him. And it's going to be interesting to see how he is received by the Oklahoma State faithful on the internet, especially if he has a good year.
Yeah, nice portal haul though here for Oklahoma defensively there, and obviously the crown jewel of that class being John Mateer. So Venables doing everything he can to reshape what's been going on over there. So we will go to another rival here of Oklahoma's, as Texas has landed Travis Shaw from North Carolina, the mammoth defensive tackle, 6'6", 340 pounds, former 5-star recruit as well here. And he's going to have 1 year of eligibility. They lost Sadir Mitchell, similar body type coming in here. And Shaw, again, when we talk about these defensive tackles, you're not going to see a lot of the same numbers as you would for some of these smaller guys because their job is to eat up a lot of space in the middle.
Yeah, and if you look at Keyshawn Silver, who was a 5-star that went to North Carolina, right, has since moved on to USC. Travis Shaw, to me, is kind of in the same boat. Former 5-star from North Carolina, never truly lived up to that 5-star hype. I mean, this was a top 20 player nationally, number 12 on the 247 rankings. So that didn't happen. But just because that didn't happen doesn't mean he's not an effective player. Keyshawn Silver, highly rated player in the portal, goes to USC. Travis Shaw going to one of the top teams, maybe the top team in America at the University of Texas. So there's a reason why it's those physical traits are just so rare. It's hard to find guys with this body type that can move. 0 sacks in his career, obviously not what you want, 6 tackles for loss. But again, Keyshawn Silver was the same way. He didn't have great stats. Travis Shaw, basketball player, just like Keyshawn Silver. So again, a lot of similarities here. And I think if you use a player like this in a specific role, he can be very, very effective. At North Carolina, he was always going to be that 5-star that didn't live up to the hype. And he wasn't, a Marvin Austin, right? He wasn't a player that everybody knew about there. But he was a guy that had a lot of snaps. He saw the field quite a bit. And now going to Texas, his snaps are going to be reduced. He's probably going to be limited to what he does best, which is take up space with a big athletic body. And I think this is going to put him in a much better position to succeed because everybody's not expecting the world from him. It's not his family and friends in the crowd saying, what happened to my 5-star guy that was going to get, go to the NFL and put our high school, put our city on the map. So this is a change of scenery that I think is going to help him quite a bit as long as he is put in a role to succeed, which is taking up blocks and just being that physical presence out there.
Yeah, and he was there at Texas this weekend. So he committed right after his visit wrapped up. And like you said, I think a fresh start for him probably is the best thing at this point of his career.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's amazing when you look at the size of this guy, 6'5", 330, but the experience level is legit. I mean, you look, freshman year, 13 of 14 games as a true freshman. Sophomore year, 12 of 13 games. 2024, all 13 games. So this is a guy that's been available, man. He's played, and that counts for something, in my view, when you have a big guy like this that's actually been on the field. Texas landed Cole Brevard out of Purdue. They've gotten quite a few defensive linemen, particularly Justice Terry out of high school, who's a spectacular talent. So they've lost guys to the pros in recent years. You look at what Sweat's doing in the pros, right? Murphy, they had some really, really talented defensive tackles. They're going to lose a few more defensive linemen here this year. But this is somebody that I think is going to help as part of the puzzle, as opposed to maybe the savior that he was billed at going to North Carolina.
So the Tar Heels lose Travis Shaw, But Bill Belichick is hard at work, and he's been making some recruiting visits. As we take a look here at the first picture of Bill Belichick here on the road visiting a recruit, and he's checking out 5-star Xavion Griffin-Haynes, 6'6", 230, out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Look at that smile on Bill, man. I mean, looks like he's really enjoying it out there, man.
Yeah, it's different. Now he has to convince guys to join his team as opposed to just drafting them. So it's a little shift, but he's got a young mind, right? He's got the girlfriend is not that far in age from these players. So she can help him relate a little bit, maybe give him some pop culture references to drop on these kids. But it's interesting, man. How funny is this? He Bill Belichick with these 5-star players. And he's starting early. This is a guy who's going to be for next year's class, the class of 2026. So he's got time to build a relationship. It's not like he's parachuting in like he's been doing in the portal, which I think has made his portal recruiting pretty interesting because that's very much rushed trying to field the team for the next season, as opposed to the recruiting class of 26, where he's got some time to sort of build his relationships and figure out who he wants and what he wants. Of course, 5-star right here in Xavier Griffin-Hayes. I don't think that's a hard evaluation for him.
They did pick up someone big in the transfer portal, and that is offensive tackle William Boone from Prairie View A&M. And this is a guy who's 6'7", 340. You see the body type there. Obviously a huge step up in competition for him, but reminds me a bit of Trent Brown when you see that 340-pound frame on him. And I'll pull up a picture here in a second. But interesting because this is a guy with 2 years of eligibility. I think the recruiting pitch may be, look, give us a couple years to develop you and work with you, get your body right, and we will have you playing in the NFL in a couple years. We've seen Carolina with a few pickups here on the offensive line. So, maybe not a shoe-in to start. I would think he has a pretty good chance to, because he's coming over there as a transfer, and he had other options on the table, including Colorado, which he visited. But a real nice development plan, I'm sure, was laid out for him.
Yeah, and his film's interesting, Pete, if you could roll that. This is a player represented by friend of the show, Austin Fenninger. You look at North Carolina's offensive line. You lose 6 to the portal, but only one of them is a starter. You bring back 3 starters in terms of Austin Blasky, Aiden Banfield, and Trayvon Green. So you do have guys that can play. You've brought in Miles McVay, who's a highly rated player, big body from Alabama, didn't play there, but has a chance now to get increased snaps with the UNC Tar Heels, and Chad Lindbergh, another former highly rated guy, ended up at Rice, now at UNC. So those guys are kind of your big-bodied, highly rated physical specimens. You had Christo Kelly from Holy Cross, that's kind of your classic Bill Belichick sleeper, athletic guy, productive, kind of fills in that center spot. So now you go back to the big bodies here with William Boone, but someone that was underrated. When you watch him, he could lose some weight. You mentioned the Trent Brown comp. I think, there's more slimming that can be done here with this player, but 782 snaps. So he played a lot of football, didn't allow a sack. Atlanta kid, wanted to get closer to the South. And from talking to his agent, he just really liked the plan that Bill Belichick and company laid out for him for his development. And that's what he's really selling, right? He's selling development. It's not just, hey, here's the Lamborghinis and everything else. It's, I'm going to develop you to get you to the league. And that message resonated here.
Yeah, without a doubt. And is this a guy 6'7", so he's tall, but maybe potentially a guard as well, right?
Yeah, he could be. Certainly
a tall guard, but
he can move guys out the way. McVay's another really big kid. So Lindbergh's got some size. So the overall size of the line is something that's standing out to me with some of these moves. Christo Kelly, not so much, but he'll play center. I could see UNC's offensive line getting steadily bigger based on these early returns and potentially being one of those mashing units. Now, look, college football is different than the pros. You have much more of a reliance on the running game in college than you do in the pros necessarily, although even that's shifting back a little bit. So the ability to blow guys off the ball and just overpower guys with size, you see it with some of these college football playoff teams. Certainly when you see it when they play some of the lower, non-SEC, non-Big Ten teams in these games, size matters. So that's something you're seeing early on with Bill Belichick's offensive line evaluations.
Gio's not a believer, man. Gio says their high school recruiting is going to tank. No shot Bill spends time recruiting 17 and 18-year-old kids.
Yeah, well, look, that's the job. That's what he signed up for. So we'll see how effective it is. It's going to be a different approach. I think part of it is targeting the right kind of kid who's really focused on development and who's focused on, being schmoozed. The different types of players, you got to focus on the ones that are receptive to your message.
Without a doubt, but we'll keep things moving here with someone who ain't hard to find, and that's Deion Sanders and Colorado with two big pickups here. One of them being linebacker Martavius French. I don't know why I put Liberty here on the graphic. It's UTSA. You have your college football dynasty on your mind. Yeah. Shout out. We were talking about Caden Salter, I think, when we were doing this. So Caden Salter is their quarterback pickup from Liberty. But you know what it might have been? Caden Salter and him started their career at Tennessee together, and I did see that there was a bit of a relationship there. So he comes over from UTSA, had a very productive season this year, and then they bring in Zarian McGill at the offensive line spot coming over from La Tech. Yeah, start with French here. I watched his game against Texas, which I thought was an outstanding game. Had a nice PFF rating in the game. I believe it was over 71 in that particular ball game. But just watching the film, he definitely looked like he belonged, which makes sense. This is a former 4-star player, signed with Tennessee out of Memphis, had some off the field stuff, led him going to junior college. He went to Hutchinson, same as the player we were just talking about who signed with USC, Waymond Jordan. So he went to the same junior college, which is a pipeline junior college, two big schools. Actually got a source at Hutchinson who said this is someone who's connected to the staff, and he got a message from the staff on this player, which said that French is awesome. He's a good player. He can run sideline to sideline, big energy guy, has some pop behind the pads, and can cover a running back or tight end. Probably not a good matchup with the slot man coverage, though. Also good in underneath zone coverage. So that's a scouting report from inside the Hutchinson program. I watched this guy play again against Texas, and that all matches up. Looking at the stats, this season, second team All-AC, 80 tackles, 17 tackles for loss, which led all inside linebackers. That's a big, big number. That shows you his instincts because he's not an edge player who's just flying upfield. He's got to read and react. So 17 tackles for loss is huge. 6'2", 225. He's got the size. This is somebody I think is going to play right away for Colorado. They've been wanting to beef up their front seven since Deion has been there. And I think this is a guy who really adds an element and an edge. Of course, he did have the suspension at Tennessee. He was suspended briefly at the beginning of this season for UTSA. Title IX issue was ultimately resolved, and he was able to return to the field. But that's going to be something he's going to have to clean up, obviously, and avoid. At Colorado, if he does, really good football player. And then their new center, Zarian McGill, now going on his third school, started at Louisiana Monroe, then played last year at Louisiana Tech, and now headed to Colorado to play for the Buffaloes. And he was second team all conference last year. Center has played in 35 career games, the position that sort of experience is super, super valuable. So the trenches, we understand, has always been something that they need to continue to beef up over there in Colorado. But this is a good pickup here for Coach Prime. Yeah, you talk about 6'2", 308, second team all Sun Belt from Taylorsville, Mississippi. The journey, right? Some of these kids have so many dashes in their names. Jones College, ULM, Louisiana Tech. But, what's been the story about Colorado, right? We talk about Shedeur, Travis Hunter, Deion, and then the next topic is always, are they going to have enough on the offensive line? So you're continuously adding players, hoping to find the right fit. This is a guy who was productive. Now, when you get these smaller school guys, you want to say that they are productive at their level. This is all Sun Belt second team. So he has produced. You had Caden Salter coming in. He's not going to be Shedeur, who's a first round type pick, but I think he's pretty close in playing style, probably more of a runner than Shedeur was at the same age. So that's a premium asset, right? You lose two of the best players in the country. Quarterback, I think, is one. Travis Hunter, that's going to be tough to replace. You do have good receivers. Obviously, Travis Hunter is unique because of everything he did. But you have good receivers. I think quarterback might not be as much of a drop-off as people expect from Sanders to Salter. Not saying he's as good, but that's going to be a closer comp. You need to protect him. You need to cut down on some of these sacks. Some of which, look, by the way, Shedeur was responsible for a lot of sacks himself. He held on to the ball quite a bit. Of course, a great player who elevated the program, but that was a con
to his game. Salter can hopefully with his legs add a different dynamic, but it all starts with the person snapping the ball. And that's why this pickup, makes a lot of sense as far as front seven on defense, offensive line on offense, build those positions, and then keep that high-flying reputation that you have that attracts a Salter and a Julian Lewis and so many great transfer receivers.
Wanted to get to a question here because Anthony Manzano has been asking a few times here. And he says, D-Money, with football in general moving towards passing heavy, do you think instead of building the old school way inside out would be better? He's asking for Miami, but in general, this is it's an interesting question here.
Look, I mean, the more things change, the more things stay the same. Look at the college football playoff, right? We saw all those games. First of all, the four teams that made it were the four best, or four of the five best defensive teams, right? Penn State, filled with first rounders. Notre Dame, you saw how good their defense was under Al Golden. Then you look at Texas. That's a salty defense, really good defensive backs, some really good young players in their front seven. And then, of course, Ohio State, that defense looked absolutely ridiculous, full of first-round type players. So the defense still wins. And then look at how they played on offense. Who are the two best running back tandems in the country? Ohio State, Penn State. They're both in it. Notre Dame had the best run game in the country, period, with a running quarterback as well. And then Texas, when they ran the ball against Clemson, they were rolling. When they struggled to run the ball against Arizona State, they had some problems. Arizona State and Boise State, the two smaller school teams, I say smaller school, the two non-powerhouse teams in the playoff. Who were their best players? Cam Skadabu for Arizona State, Ashton Jeanty for Boise State. So I think it's actually the opposite, where we are seeing a trend, at least to win big in the playoff, towards defense, running the ball, which is the same way Alabama won all their championships. They did layer passing on top of it as the dynasty progressed, but obviously the foundation was always running power and the defensive strength. Georgia, same thing. Michigan last year, certainly the same thing. I think you're seeing that here in the playoffs as well.
All right, we'll wrap things up here with one last topic, and that's going to be Malachi Nelson, former number one quarterback. I think ESPN might have had him as number one player in the country come out of high school, and he is going to be headed to UTEP, started his career at USC, was at Boise State this last season, and now headed to UTEP. I'm going to pull up his huddle highlights here in a second because that's, unfortunately, that's what we got on him since he hasn't played much at the collegiate level. But, it's an interesting situation here. A guy who was a number one, former number one overall prospect. The injury to his shoulder, I think, is something that is looming large here. But it's tough to think a guy like him just loses his talent overnight. Are you thinking the injury is that bad here?
Yeah, the shoulder injury is interesting because what's been reported was that it was his non-throwing shoulder, but you did see a dip in arm strength from the reps I've seen of him. So hopefully that develops. He's never been the biggest kid in the world as far as weight. So maybe as he just gets more physically mature, you do see development. More than anything, the guy probably just needs reps, right? So playing behind Caleb Williams and Miller Moss. Caleb Williams, first pick of the draft, Heisman Trophy. Miller Moss, solid enough player that he goes to USC, starts, and then gets another starting opportunity at Louisville. So, he was no scrub. Talk about Boise State. Obviously, Ashton Jeanty got a lot of attention, but I thought Maddox Madsen was pretty darn good, right? So it's not like he got beat out by bums here. So there's a chance to play. He said he had a lot of faith in Scotty Walden, had bigger opportunities that he chose not to pursue. So really, we got to see reps, man. Quarterback has become a position where reps matter so much. I say it every show. The best quarterbacks in the NFL as far as young players, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, more reps than anybody. Number one projected quarterback this year, Cam Ward. How many reps did he have between Incarnate Word, Washington State, and now Miami? So a guy like Malachi Nelson is, I think, making the smart decision to go somewhere where he can play and throw the ball. Because if he just goes to another big program and waits, or just waits at Boise, it's not going to happen for him. If it's going to happen for him, he's got to get on the field. He's got to play. He's got to throw the ball. He's got to, whatever injuries he's had, he's got to work through those. And then in the process, as he gains weight, gets stronger, maybe his stock rises. If you're talking about NFL or whatever goals he had coming out of high school, those are just as attainable at UTEP as anywhere else, because quarterbacks are quarterbacks. Everybody knows who this guy is. If he starts putting up numbers at UTEP, I promise you there'll be plenty of scouts going to El Paso to check him out. So,
and I mean, not just that. Unfortunately, he would be a guy who would be heavily on the radar for the portal next year again.
I mean, how many times?
Unfortunately, if you're a UTEP fan, I'm saying.
Right. And look, Pete, how many times have we talked about this on this exact show, right? We've seen guys that sign with the SEC or the Big Ten, and you look at their background, you say, okay, they're coming from a small school, but as a recruit, they went to a big school and it didn't work out there. They went to a smaller school. They went to a JUCO or somewhere else, rehabilitated, so to speak, and then transferred back into a big school. So they're back where they started.
Chandler Morris, to me, is a prime example of that.
Oh, yeah. And it's just crazy. So I'm pulling up, Pete, the 2023 quarterback rankings, right? So these are the top 10 quarterbacks nationally in 2023, which, if you think about it, is not that long ago. These are second-year players this year, right? And you look at Arch Manning. He hasn't played yet for obvious reasons, playing behind Quinn Ewers. Nico Iamaleava. I butchered that brutally. I call him Nico. He's been okay, but he hasn't been, a dominant player for Tennessee. I wouldn't say he's been the strength of Tennessee's team despite what he's getting paid. Dante Moore goes from UCLA to Oregon. He's already in the portal. Jackson Arnold, Oklahoma, struggle with no offensive line, no wide receivers. He's in the portal. He goes to Auburn. Next one up, Malachi Nelson. We saw what's happened with his career. Jaden Rashada, right after him, he just went back in the portal after committed to Miami.
Is that just what it's going to look like every year when we look at these top QB lists, though, D?
It could be. I mean, look, go to the line. Aiden Childs, Michigan State, from Oregon State. Austin Mack moving around. Avery Johnson has stayed put, although he's been, people have talked about him potentially going in the portal one of these days. He stayed put. That's just kind of, I don't know. I mean, that seems to be the trend where the portal is what it is. Look at the playoff, right, Pete? I mean, Drew Aller is a guy that's played and stayed. But
Riley Leonard
was a portal kid. Quinn Ewers was a portal kid. Who am I missing here, Pete?
Will Howard.
Will Howard was a portal kid. So this is the way of the world, man. And I think this is a guy who, Jaden Rashada, who's another California kid, is in the same boat as Malachi Nelson,
who probably should go somewhere where he knows he's going to be the guy.
Exactly. I think he watches what's happening. You're probably sure he's watching exactly what's happening with Malachi Nelson, thinking, where do I go? Because he went to Georgia. That didn't work out for him. He was buried in the bench there. So what's his next move? To me, he should follow Malachi Nelson's lead, go to a group of 5 school. It's going to put the football in his hands and have him throw, 30 times a game and then see what he's got.
Agreed. 100%. So, man, loaded show today. There was a lot to get to, just over an hour here. We appreciate everyone who's been with us. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel. You guys are helping us grow in a major way, and we're going to have a ton of content this year. We just pretty much started doing this about a month ago, so keep it locked here on Group Chat Football Live. We'll keep you all updated with all the movement across the country, and we'll be going live on Canes Insight here in just a bit, so check us out over there. Appreciate the support. Like and subscribe. See you guys tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.